Hi, I'm Seth, and we're going to look at some easy repairs you can do to your percussion section. When looking for serial numbers on your percussion instruments, most will have it. They'll usually be stamped onto the manufacturer's logo. We're going to start with the snare drum. For the most part, you're going to be looking at either head replacement or something to do with the snare. Let's start with the head. There are two types of heads. There's the batter head, which is the part that you hit, and the bottom head. When you're replacing a head, you need to make sure you know which side you need and also the diameter of the head that you need to order. To remove the drum head, you're going to need a drum key. You're going to place it onto the lug screws and loosen them off. You can either go around or you could go zigzag like that. Some people just have a personal preference about releasing the tension on the head. Once all the lug screws are loose, you can lift off the top ring. Be careful, because each lug screw also has a washer attached to it. You don't want to lose those. Now you have the drum head, you can just pop off the drum head and look inside the drum. When you're putting the drum head back on, it's a good idea to just check out the shell, make sure that it's in good condition. You're going to place the drum head back on top, snugly. Then you're going to take your rim, place it on top, make sure that all of the lug screws go back into the lug, again, ensuring that those washers are in the right place. When tightening up the snare rim, it's a good idea to tighten the screws by hand first, then you can use the drum key in a crisscross fashion to make sure that the drum head is being pulled to the proper tightness in a uniform manner. Now we're going to tune the snare drum. This is a bit of a personal preference to which pitch you'd like to choose to tune it to. What you're going to do is you're going to actually be playing the drum head opposite one of the lug screws, and the idea is to make sure that as you go all the way around that it's the same pitch. Hear how that's higher? So this lug is tightened tighter than that one. You also want to tune it in a cross drum pattern to make sure that, again, that head is being pulled down in a uniform manner. On the bottom head, we have our snare. This is a series of wires that runs across it. When it's tight up against the bottom head, it makes the distinctive snare sound. When it's loose with this lever here, that snare hangs down and is no longer touching the bottom head, and we just get a tom sound. Sometimes these snare mechanisms become loose. The snare is attached to the snare mechanism usually by a series of either string or ribbon. To adjust the snare, you need to loosen or tighten on these screws here to either tighten or loosen the snare drum up against the head. Make sure that you do not over tighten it, because you are still going to engage the snare when you bring that lever up. Now we're going to talk about the bass drum. The process of replacing a drum head on a bass drum is exactly the same as a snare drum. The parts just look a little different. Instead of needing a drum key to remove the lug screws, on a bass drum, usually they're a T-handled, which we can turn easily by hand. One quick step: sometimes you don't have to actually remove the entire lug screw. You can actually just loosen it off, take that stop arm, flip it around, which will let you take off that rim without removing all of these lug screws. Now that all the lug screws and hooks are removed, you can easily just take off the collar.
Once your bass drum head is off, it's always a good idea to make sure that there's nothing inside of it
Lots of students like to throw pencils or other small objects inside, just as a collector's item. When you're putting your drum head back on, there's a couple things to watch. Make sure you're inspecting the shell of the bass drum for any scratches, dents, or cracks. Again, make sure that the inside is clean. When you're putting on your drum head, sometimes it's nice to make sure that the logos are going the same way. Once the drum head is secure, then you can put on your collar. Now we can take the lug claws and bring them all around the collar. Now we're going to tighten up the lug screws. When you're tightening your drum head, make sure you're tightening your lug screws in a crisscross fashion to make sure your drum head is going down at a uniform tension. Now we're going to look at the orchestra bells. Make sure to inspect the frame of your bells. If they're wood, make sure they're not fraying where we could get splinters. If they're plastic, make sure they're in great condition. The bars themselves are secured through felt into the wood or plastic with a screw with an O-ring attached to it. That O-ring helps the metal bars actually ring. If those screws are tightened too tight, that bar will not resonate, it will not vibrate. So if you have one dead bar, you might need to loosen off the screws. Make sure to inspect your mallets to make sure they're in good playing order. We don't want anything to shatter and hurt anyone. As always, make sure you update your digital inventory with any repairs you've made to your instruments. Perfect.